It's helpful to have the Department of Defense wide perspective so that we don't each need to repeat the phrase energy assurance means mission assurance over and over again, because that's really fundamentally where all of us begin in these conversations. So I always like to start my remarks with just a sense of who's in the audience. So if you all would humor me for 30 seconds of my 5 minutes, I'd appreciate it. Will you just raise your hand if you're currently serving or previously have served in the U.S. Air Force, either as a civilian or active duty, Guard, Reserve? 2, and okay, a couple from my current staff. You guys don't count. All right, so 2 folks. Let's broaden it to see how about currently or previously served as a civilian or active Guard, Reserve in any of the 3 services, or as a civilian in DoD. Okay, a lot more in that. Okay, good. So I won't have to spend too long talking about what your Air Force does for you. Sometimes when we are talking to broad audiences, there's not a great understanding actually of what your Air Force does. And certainly we tend to think of the Air Force as warfighters, and that's right. We flew about 20,000 combat missions in the Middle East alone last year. But a lot of what we do is mobility. So we move things around the world, whether it's soldiers and airmen, whether it's tanks, whether it's supplies, whether it's medical. We flew 80,000 airlift missions last year on every single continent. Not 80,000 each continent, 80,000 total, but we touched every single continent. We brought home over 6,000 wounded warriors off battlefields. That's not a number that we want to be high, but if it has to happen, we're the group that brings those folks home safely and gets them the care that they need. So we're serving the American public not just in wartime, but in peacetime and in keeping the peace and in deterring war as well. So I think that's a really important element. And John's right. We use a lot of energy. The Air Force is the largest energy user in the Department of Defense, which is the largest energy user in the U.S. government, which is the largest energy user in the country. So it's a big organization. We spend about $9 billion a year on energy. About $8 billion of that is for jet fuel. And the vast majority of that, as John mentioned, is for mobility missions, not for combat missions. So that's really important. We also are just a very large organization. We have about 5,000 aircraft, which is hard to really get what that means. But if you add up the entire fleets of American Airlines, United Airlines, Southwest Airlines, let me make sure I get them all right, Delta, FedEx, and UPS, you add them all up, and we have more aircraft than they do. So it's very significant. So what does $8 billion of jet fuel mean? My husband is in the back of the room. He's a Yankees fan. If you fill up Yankee Stadium with jet fuel, Well, all right, I guess I should probably figure out how many times we fill up the Red Sox stadium. But if you fill up Yankee Stadium 25 times with jet fuel, that's how much fuel we use. That's a heck of a lot of fuel. From an installations, facilities perspective, we have about 160 installations around the world. About 70 of those we consider to be major installations. So many of them are much smaller, maybe just a radar site, something like that. But about 70 of them are essentially municipalities. So when we think about facility energy, we don't just think about a building here or there. We think about 40 to 50,000 buildings clustered together, everything from child care centers to very sophisticated supercomputing centers to radars to missile silo sites, and really whole cities. We do a lot of utilities, we do water, we do wastewater, the whole gamut. And in terms of comparing size, we have about 615 million square feet of buildings. Compared to where I come from, if you added up every single Walmart store, every Sam's Club store, every neighborhood market, every little Walmart Express across the entire country, it's about 615 plus or minus. So pretty comparable in size to the Fortune #1 company in the world. So it's big. It's big. So why do we care about energy? As John said, it's all about mission assurance for us. It's mission assurance through energy assurance. Energy underpins everything we do, and without it, we have no mission. So it fuels every sortie, it launches every spacecraft, and it powers every mission control, all of command and control, all of our remotely piloted vehicles. So what are we doing? Similar things to what you probably heard 4 years from now. We really have 4 areas of focus: assuring supply. Tightly linked to that is building resiliency. Tightly linked to that, I don't like the phrase reducing demand, because it's not really about reducing demand. We could just not fly our airplanes and that would reduce demand down to 0, right? So it's really about getting more fight out of every BTU. We're making good progress, I would say. We're on track to meet many of the federal goals that have been passed down to us, many of which Sharon laid out for us just a few minutes ago. But I'll tell you, in addition to the financial challenges, there's a pesky thing called inertia. And I find that in these conversations, whether you are a big global corporation, whether you are your own individual household, or whether you're the Department of Defense, we like to talk about finances, we like to talk about technology, and we like to talk about policy. And we think, gosh, if we could just align those 3 things, we would solve all these energy problems. And I think what we often forget to talk about is inertia, the inertia behind existing ways of doing things, the inertia behind existing relationships between people and technologies, behind people and organizations. And that's a lot of what, when you're working in a large organization, anywhere, a lot of what the job is to shift the momentum of the inertia. And I would just say that it's a real honor to serve with the folks next to me and many of the folks in the room who have really shifted the inertia. And I can give more details on anything that people want to talk about when we get to the Q&A.